When they see me, they know that every day when I'm breathing, it's for us to go farther. You know, every time I speak, I want the truth to come out. You know what I'm saying? Every time I speak, I want to shiver. You know, I don't want them to be like, they know what I'm going to say because it's polite. They know what I'm going to say. And even if I get in trouble, you know what I'm saying? Ain't that what we're supposed to do? I'm not saying I'm going to rule the world or I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the brain that will change the world. And that's our job, is to spark somebody else watching us. We might not be the ones, but let's not be selfish, and because we're not going to change the world, let's not talk about how we should change it. I don't know how to change it, but I know if I keep talking about how dirty it is out here, somebody's going to clean it up.
And now he's been promoted. His job, principal.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Sneaker Principal Podcast. This is Uche Njoku, and I can't believe it. This is the 50th episode. Those of you who've been following this this journey, this all started last May. Literally the last week in May, after schools had been shut down. We were going through a lot of things with the pandemic, and I was, like, I've shared this honestly, I was going through some level of anxiety, and I was like, you know what, I need something to do that they will allow me to engage my colleagues who I can't see right now and talk about what's going on and talk about what we do. And as a result, you know, one podcast turned into two, and now it's almost a year later. It's actually a new year, and this is podcast number 50. And I want to thank you all who've been rocking with me through this whole entire journey. It's been great, and I'm not even sure where this is all going, but I am passionate about making sure that we're engaging in conversation about what's happening in our community, especially around education and the needs of our families. Do me a great favor, if you're new here, please subscribe, hit the notification bell if you're on YouTube, so that the algorithm pushes this content further out. Not only that, I want to welcome those of you who are watching on different platforms, including Facebook, LinkedIn, if you're on YouTube, of course, and Twitch. So thank you so much for that. So this evening, I am bringing to you someone who I mean, you already know from the thumbnail for this episode. This is someone that I have been watching, honestly, from the beginning of my career. I became a New York City teacher in 2005, and in 2009, 2010, I was part of a school, Bronx Community College Academy, that moved into the Roberto Clemente building in the South Bronx, and we shared a building with the Eagle Academy for Young Men. And I have to be honest with you, I was kind of wowed because I didn't know they even existed. You know, I was still new to the city. I was still trying to get my chops as an educator. At the time, I was a dean, and I was like, wow, here's a school of all young men. And why was that special to me? Because my first high school experience was in Nigeria, and I attended an all-boys military school. And I just remembered just having those flashbacks of that experience and the empowerment and all the things that went well for me there, and how I established myself and my confidence there as a student. And this evening, I have the honor of speaking to the president and CEO of the Eagle Academy Foundation, and he's also was the founding principal of the Eagle Academy for Young Men. This is the first school in a network of innovative all-boys schools in New York City, and I can read through all the the information you can find online, but I think it's just best that I bring this gentleman on, and again, I'm so honored to be having this conversation, and I hope it empowers you who are watching to see what the possibilities are for educating not only all of our children, but especially our Black and brown boys. So, that being said, I'd like to welcome Mr. David Banks. How you doing, sir?
Thank you. Good evening, Brother
Good
King, and thank you for having me this evening, and to all your listeners who are tuning in. Hoping to have a great conversation tonight.
Definitely. Let's just jump into it, because in doing my homework, I'm watching YouTube videos, and I'm actually cracked open the SOAR again. Yeah, I see a copy of it right on your right behind you on the shelf. And I was like, what am I gonna ask this man that he hasn't already been asked so many times before? So I'm just keep it simple. I'm gonna assume that people who are here right now don't know. So my question to you first is, who is David Banks?
Well, thank you so much for that. David Banks is the son of Philip and Janice Banks, firstborn. Just turned 59 years old on January 14th.
Happy birthday, sir.
Thank you, brother. And spent the entire day with my mother to thank her for being the person who brought me here, who provided safe passage for me into this space, and who loved me and continues to love me, who nurtured me, and even as a grown man and a grandfather now myself, continues to nurture me. My father, who is my greatest hero, who retired from the New York City Police Department after almost a 30-year career. I tell you about them because David Banks is the embodiment of Philip and Janice Banks, right? The people who bore me and gave me the love, the discipline, the high expectations that I needed as a young African-American male growing up in New York City, the oldest of 3 boys. Went to public schools my entire life, went on to become a lawyer, educator, and have really dedicated my career to working with young people to try to help them to achieve their dreams, to reach their promise. And I recognize that in order to do that, they have to also be surrounded by the same love, discipline, nurturance, and high expectations that I was given by my parents. I try to provide an ecosystem for young people to help them to do that. And so I currently am the head of the Eagle Academy Foundation. We run a network of all boys schools in New York City as well as Newark, New Jersey. But I think even more broadly than that, I've dedicated my life to helping young people. Before I was the principal of the original Eagle Academy in the Bronx, I was the founding principal of the first urban assembly school in New York City as well, the Bronx School for Law, Government, and Justice, which is right across the street from your old Roberto Clemente campus. And so to me, I recognize that God has placed on me a special blessing, which is to try to help to provide safe passage for as many young people as I possibly can. And that's the work in the space that I've dedicated my life toward. And that's what I do every day.
So what is the Eagle Academy for Young Men?
So the Eagle Academy for Young Men is, well, let me just say this. The Eagle Academy for Young Men is a school, an all boys traditional public school. It's not a charter school. It's a traditional public school, which started in the Bronx with the first academy. And I was the founding principal of that school. The school was conceived by my organization that I've been part of for many years, 100 Black Men. So in order to understand Eagle, you have to understand who 100 Black Men are. The 100 Black Men is a civic organization of professional Black men that have been around for almost 60 years now in New York City. And in fact, the person who named it the 100 Black Men was the Honorable David Dinkins, God rest his soul, who just recently passed away. He was one of the founders of the organization, along with members of the Tuskegee Airmen and former Congressman Charlie Rangel, just great men from our community who recognized that they needed to be organized to provide a level of leadership for the community. And 100 Black Men was an organization that they created. They did it in response to issues of police brutality against Black women, interestingly enough. And it was their response to that. And since that time, there have been 100 Black Men chapters that have opened up not only across the country, but all over the world. But it started in New York City. And out of all the chapters around the world, the greatest initiative that any of these chapters have created was the New York chapter creating the Eagle Academy for young men as the first all-boys public school in New York City in almost 30 years when we opened our doors in 2004. We subsequently created, and I say we because I've been a long-standing member of the 100 Black Men. We subsequently created the Eagle Academy Foundation as a separate not-for-profit 501c3 that would really help to fundraise and provide all the other supports that the schools would need as we went further. And I say the schools because we literally went from having our original school in the Bronx. We then went to Ocean Hill, Brownsville, and Brooklyn with our second school. We ultimately wound up going to Southeast Queens with our third school. We went to Central Harlem, Newark, New Jersey, Staten Island. And we went to very specific neighborhoods, Uche, because we were responding to a report that Columbia University put out, which said that 75% of the state's prison population were coming from 7 neighborhoods in New York City. You think about that for a minute. The entire state of New York, not only does 75% of its prison population come from New York City alone, but it comes from 7 very specific neighborhoods in New York City. It's the prison pipeline that people write about, we have conversations about, we have conferences and panel discussions, and we talk about the plight of young men of color. But it was made manifest to us through this report. And that's when we decided to do something about it. We had always mentored young people. We had provided scholarships. We had done our civic duty, if you will. But we recognized that we were in the middle of a sure enough battle. And when you recognize that, you got to go above and beyond and do more than you've been doing. And that's what was the impetus for us to create the Eagle Academy for young men. And now we're serving over 3,000 boys. We've graduated over 2,000, sent them to colleges and universities across the country, boys and men. And now we're training schools and school districts across the nation in best practices for engaging young men and helping them to realize their full potential.
In reading the book, SOAR, How Boys Learn, Succeed, and Develop Character, that book is, I'll be honest with you, that book has been on my shelf. One of those, I got to dig deep into this. Of course, this gave me a reason to actually really crack it open and highlight and go through it. And the one thing that I read in there that I have to share this because I was really moved by this, and it linked me back to Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, In Between Worlds, where he talks about safe passage and what boys have to go through and just to get to school. And that was something that I think also you shared about your childhood with Sly sitting on the stoop, in Crown Heights, and right. Just how kids were being picked off and recruited, especially young boys. Yeah. And that stayed in my head, just safe passage, because then you talked about in the book how when onboarding the young men for Eagle Academy, you guys would take them through the neighborhood and say, this is the way you should travel. This is how you need to move in this community, in this community, to get to school safe, get home safe as well. And the whole notion of safe passage, it's something that's been resonating in my mind. And a question that I have for you is, how does the notion of safe passage and the tenets that are espoused by Eagle Academy, how does that translate into these times right now with the pandemic, with Black Lives Matter, with what happened last Wednesday, what happened last Wednesday in the Capitol Hill? Because I can tell you this, my students are still struggling with that. My teachers are still struggling with that. So I know this is a heavy question, and I tend to do that a lot. I'm working on it. How does that all pan out for you? How do you look at that?
You know, safe passage is, there's a notion of physical safe passage, but there's also the notion of emotional safe passage, and it is my deep belief that we must attend to the safe passage of all of our children, physically as well as emotionally. So in the book, sure, when I talk about how to navigate the streets, you know, for when it's time for you to go home and make your way back home, that's just real talk with young people, particularly with young men who often fall prey to the gangs and the other kind of negative influences in the streets. You know, at Eagle Academy, our young men wear uniforms, but sometimes that's not the safest thing to do when it's time to go home, and you got to navigate your way in some other spaces out there in these streets. And so we have real talk about that, and we help them to understand how to move in that way. And emotionally, which is what so many of them are feeling now, they're feeling less of a physical threat than they are feeling an emotional threat, at least as it relates to the riots that we saw at Capitol Hill, just the ongoing craziness that's emanating from Washington and this White House. It's been like a dark cloud together with this pandemic. So how do you provide safe passage? You do it by pulling them close to you. So let me tell you what we've done at Eagle. From the very beginning of this pandemic, we have launched a virtual town hall. Now, town hall is a full-on gathering of all of our young men across our schools. In each of our individual schools, we would have a daily town hall. Before our young men ever step foot into their classroom, they gather as a full-on community so that we can touch and agree with one another. During that town hall, our principal will offer up powerful remarks about just the issues of the day. Our student leaders will talk to the other young brothers about the way in which we need to not only to conduct ourselves, but what are the issues of the day from their perspective that we need to pay attention to. At our town hall, we lift up libation as an African tradition every day, where a number of young men, unsolicited, will come up and they will pour water into the plant in the African tradition and ask that all of their brothers, you know, lift them up and keep their spirit. You know, somebody will come up and talk about their grandmother who's in the hospital, who's sick. And this is the woman who raised me and she's not doing well. And I went to see her. And I just ask that you all keep her in your thoughts and prayers. And together we say, as they pour the water into the pot, into the plant, Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. We are with you, brother. We are together. You are our brother. We are each other's keeper, right? Like that's real and manifest at Eagle. As we close out our town hall, we offer up the poem Invictus that every young man at Eagle Academy knows. Invictus is the poem of resilience. Invictus was what Congressman John Lewis, who just passed away, said was his favorite poem. He recited it every day. Invictus is the poem that Nelson Mandela said when he was locked up on Robben Island for almost 3 decades. He recited that poem every day. It's what kept him sane. That's what he said. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. You imagine the young men of Eagle Academy, they recite that poem every day from the time they're in the 6th grade until they're graduating as 12th graders, right? And what the words of that poem speak to them into their spirit. is that when you get knocked down, you get back up. Your destiny is not to be on the ground. This life that we live in, particularly as Black and Latino men, is going to knock you down. You are going to take shots, but you have to have that voice inside of you that says you are special, you are loved, your community loves you and needs you. So you have to continue to fight. That which might hurt you should not break you. Like, we believe that. We talk about that. We talk about that now on a weekly basis through our town halls that we do, our virtual town hall, where we connect all 3,000 of the young men of Eagle Academy on a weekly basis, where they get to share and talk. They pour libation. They recite Invictus. We bring guest speakers in to talk to them about the challenges of life that they might face and how to navigate even through these difficult times, which are ultimately going to be historic. They're going to tell their children about living through these days, just like they read in the history books about what it was like to go through the civil rights movement. They're going through their own civil rights movement. We want them to be woke. We want them to appreciate it. We want them to understand how to take their rightful place in it. That's why their education is so important, that they be fully engaged. And so that's how we provide safe passage. Our relationships that these young men have with their teachers. This is nothing new for us. We just have to fully activate in a different kind of way. We have some of the most committed faculty that you will find. Our principals are some of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. How they pour back and they give to these young men. These young men are sitting on that virtual platform with their parents who are sitting side by side. Many of our parents are home. So they're connecting with us in the schools at a level now that they couldn't even do before, because now they're home. So they're also learning more about what Eagle really is. We are each other's keeper, as my brother's keeper. So it's just a very powerful convening. It's a family, and this is what we're doing in these difficult times. We're sticking together.
Thank you for that. A question that another question I have is, so in reading the book and also looking at my experience as a school leader, I am West African, born and raised, yet in an African household. So a lot of those tendencies you're talking about are part of my upbringing.
Sure.
But my American upbringing was in Los Angeles. I shared this with you. I grew up in South Central LA, Inglewood, California. Gang banging and all that. That was just the norm of the world that I grew up in Los Angeles. So when I came to New York City, a lot of what I saw when I moved, my first school was Walton High School in the Bronx. And first, the principal then at the time told me, listen, the job is yours, but we have a gang problem. And I was like, you got a gang problem? I literally grew up in that. And one of my notices was this: the high school I went to in Los Angeles, I went to Inglewood High School, and I always feel uncomfortable saying this because people always want to racialize things, but I tell this to my teachers, I tell this to my kids. My principal was Black, my teachers were all Black. I grew up in a Black neighborhood, and if I was doing something dumb on the block, the OG blood on the block would check me. And they knew my father. They would be like, yo, and they would call me, you're African, chill. I know your pops. I mean, those are the norms of growing up in a community that was very grounded, where everybody knew each other. Kind of like you described about 223rd in Queens and growing up in Crown Heights. A lot of those things were very similar to me. But a lot of our kids grew up in a very different world now, where those safety nets are not there anymore. That sense of community is not there anymore. You can live in a building and not know your neighbor for 20 years. Everybody stays in their own corners. So our kids are not as safe as they used to be. But then when they come to the building, and one of the biggest issues is that there is a cultural divide a lot of times. What you're describing at Eagle Academy is something that for a lot of people seem like magic. Like you get young men to do what? You have teachers who do what? And in most schools, it's a constant struggle, to build those relationships, to make those connections between staff, between students, between families. My question is, what do you say to a principal who's like, I need I see what you're doing at Eagle. How do I replicate? What's something I can start doing in my school to start replicating that? How do I get my teachers to connect with the students? How do I get my young men to, because in most schools, let's be honest here, the ones who are failing the most are the young men. You know, how do we re-engage them? So what is it? What is the guiding light you can give to tell school leaders and school communities, this, start moving in this direction first, or start doing this first?
I would tell them, well, a couple of things. One, we can take some very basic steps like you have done. I wrote this book, right? I wrote the book Soar, and I didn't write it to just be, you know, on a bookshelf. There are some serious lessons in this book about how to engage young people and young men. Born from my experiences that I've had, particularly my experiences at Eagle Academy. So those lessons are written in that book. There's some personal stories of my growing up and my brothers, but most of the lessons are from the experiences that we've received by doing the work that we've been doing at Eagle Academy. So that's one of the first steps that people can do. They can get the book and start there, number one. Number two, I would encourage any of them to reach out to us, because we can be helpful in providing a level of training for them in their schools. We're doing that now across New York City in a whole host of schools and school districts within the city right now. And the reason for that is this. Think about this, Uche. You just pointed out that the boys, and the boys of color in particular, are the ones who struggle the most in our school system. That's not just in New York. That's all across the country. In fact, that's all around the world. And yet, most teachers have never received even a day of training of what it means to engage young men in the classroom. Not even a day. They've gone to these schools of education. They've gotten all these certifications. They've gone through all this, and they have never received even one day of what that means. What are the best practices around how you engage these young brothers in a way so that everybody can win? Without that level of training, what happens? You have teachers who always wanted to become teachers. They love the classroom. They love the school experience. They were good students. They come into our school system, and now they're faced with these young brothers who bring a different kind of energy that they have never seen before, and they have no idea what to do with it. And more often than not, that energy gets diagnosed as negative. Kids wind up getting suspended. There's all kinds of disciplinary issues that happen. The kids are told that they're being insubordinate, disrespectful, all because the adults do not have the skills that they need to know how to engage with the young men. When I was the principal for Eagle in our very first year, I had already been a principal for 7 years. And I was within my first, 2 weeks. And it was the end of the day, and I'm in my office on the first floor. My door's open. It's dismissal time. The boys are making their way out of the building. This was when we were in that building right across the street from where you were. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting at my desk, and I saw one young man fly by in the middle of the crowd. Just somebody going at a faster pace. And it got my attention. In the next 10 seconds, 2 more boys, bam, bam, like fast. And I said, uh-oh, right? Because if you're a school leader, you have that sense.
Yeah.
Okay, something's happening. And I got up, and I made my way out into the hallway. So in a sea of young men making their way out of the building, there's 3 boys on the floor, wrapped in like a death grip on the ground. One's got one boy by the leg, the other one's got him around the head. And I came out, and I've got to use my principal voice, right? Like, yo, what are y'all doing? And it was like a Kodak moment. These guys are on the floor. They're locked in a grip. They're laying on their back. They looked up at me, and they said, what? We're just playing. I said, get your behinds up off the floor and take yourself home. Up all this foolishness, right? But there are a lot of places in that moment, you know what would have happened?
Suspensions.
Suspensions, come in, calling parents, all of this stuff, right? Where sometimes it's just boy behavior, and you need to have a level of sensitivity as you help them to mature into responsible young men, recognizing that it's not always bad. It doesn't always need to be disciplined, right? They don't need to be suspended, right? But you have to offer up these scenarios to teachers and educators. You have to do role play so that they understand, how do you do that? How do you work it through? When a young man is acting up in class and doing something that you know that he doesn't need to do, the worst thing that you can do as a teacher is to put that young man on blast in front of his friends.
Yeah.
What you need to do is as you're making your way around the room, you very smoothly whisper in their ear as you're continuing your lesson, I see the foolishness, cut it out. We're going to have to deal with this later. And you keep it moving. When you say, Rodney, what are you doing? I have to talk to you all the time. You put Rodney on blast, and now Rodney's friends are like, ooh, you're getting put on blast. Rodney feels he's got to come back at the teacher in order to save face for in front of his boys, right? But if so now Rodney tries to save face. Now he says something that he shouldn't say. Now you got a much bigger issue. Everybody's losing now. All because the teacher did not have the skill set for knowing how do you deal with this where everybody can still win. Teachers have to be taught how to do that. They've not been taught those kinds of skills and those kinds of practices that will help them in the classroom. That's what we do at Eagle. So I would suggest to any of those folks who are out there, those are the kinds of things that they can reach out to us about. We're training other school districts on how to do that even now. But more importantly, it's the kind of thing that teachers across the entire system need to be trained. But that recognition of that needs to come from the chancellor's office. It needs to be in a space where you recognize that there are schools that are doing things even beyond what Eagle Academy does that are absolutely amazing. And everybody needs to hear that. All schools should be learning from what the great things that other schools are doing, not working in complete isolation and trying to figure these things out for yourself when your neighbor down the block and around the corner has already figured it out. But that takes leadership, that takes vision from the chancellor's office to help us understand, how do you connect the dots so that everybody is learning from each other so that we can all grow and we're not in competition with one another, but that everybody can in fact win.
So you have very unique expertise around young men. I'm wondering what your thoughts are around the data, the ever-growing data around our young women, and like I remember I did my graduate studies at Columbia, and a lot of that data, like you talked about with the 7 neighborhoods, the $1 million blocks that are producing, $1 million in revenue for the prison system, but now the data around our girls is getting atrocious.
That's right.
We're seeing the criminalization of our Black and brown girls, and like for example, I forget what city that was, but over the course of last spring and summer, the young lady who was incarcerated because she wasn't doing her homework, and it was an article in the Atlantic about that, and like that level of just aggression now hitting with our young girls. What have you learned from Eagle Academy from your work with young men that can apply to young women as well, or do you believe that's a complete separate thing?
No, it's not a completely separate thing. In fact, what Eagle is doing right now, we're at the end of a 4-year program that we have been working with a host of middle schools in Brooklyn, and we've been training them in the best practices of Eagle of how we engage boys. But you know what we have found? Those same practices apply to the girls, right? Because at the core of what we're doing with young men is about relational learning. If I had to pick one thing to tell you, it's the most important thing. Sure, training teachers in these practices, getting mentors for young people, providing career opportunities and exposure so that they can see what the larger world is really all about, having rituals and ceremonies and traditions in the schools, how you engage the parents. All of these are things that we do with Eagle Academy. But every one of those things can be applied to girls as well. We had just focused on the boys because at the time that we were doing our work, it was the boys who were the ones that were struggling the most. But we've steadily been watching the girls continue to struggle. But it's the same essential practices. But it's practices that say, I see you. I care about you. We don't have enough of that. And we need to do that. And far too often, that's because our system is designed around just, all of our efforts have to be just about preparing you to take a test. Like the complete value of our school is based on how well our school and our students perform on standardized exams. If we continue to think through that very limited paradigm, we will always have issues. But when a school recognizes that the greater mission of that school is about preparing healthy young people who are prepared to take their rightful place in society, then you move very differently. If you truly believe the person that's sitting in front of you, boy or girl, young man or young lady, could be the next US senator, could be an architect, a banker, right? Could be the doctor who's charged with operating on you to save your life. If you believe that, you move very differently as adults in how you work with young people. If you don't believe that, then that's the core of the issues and the challenges that we have. So I would just say to you that as we watch these issues that are happening with our young ladies, our young ladies are going through a lot of the same things that our boys are going through. There's some distinctions, certainly, but the fundamental response to all of it is about relationship. How we connect with young people so that they know that we care. I ask teachers all the time when they complain about how the kids are acting. I said, when's the last time that you had lunch with your kids during their lunch period in the lunchroom with them, right? There's some folks who say, I taught my classes the last thing in the world that I want to do. When I have my 45 minutes off, I don't even want to see any kids. I'm not saying you need to do it every day, but I'm telling you, there's something magical about having lunch with the kids, just as something that you could try. When the kids see you outside of the confines of your classroom, they see you differently. When you show up and just sit down next to them in the lunchroom and you're going to have lunch with them, and they're like, what you doing, Miss Wilson? Why are you here? Like, this is the time we're supposed to be with our friends. But in the beginning, they will act like, oh, God, it's just like the parents being around. But do that a few times and see what happens. When I was a young teacher, I was teaching elementary school. And when the school day would be done, I would be heading to my car to go home, and I'd walk out of the school with 3 or 4 other female women teachers from the school who were good friends of mine. And we walked through the schoolyard as we were heading to our cars. And the kids would be in the playground playing basketball. And I'd stop for a minute and put my bag down and say, let me take a shot. Let me get a shot. And the boys would go crazy trying to get the ball to throw it to Mr. Banks. Oh, Mr. Banks, you can't shoot. You can't shoot, right? And I'm sitting there and I sit there and I might take 2 or 3 shots. And they would lose their minds because they were like seeing a teacher like in connection with them. Like you came down off your high horse and you came into their space. It changes the dynamic of how they see you. You know, and then they start saying, oh, can you dunk? I said, let's not get carried away. Okay, let's just take a couple of shots here. Let's be easy with this. I'm not trying to hurt myself either, right? And but in that, and all of that, Uche, would take me 2 minutes. 2 minutes. But in that 2 minutes, they were like, oh, Mr. Banks is cool. You make connection. I would watch some of the women teachers stop for a minute in that same schoolyard and get in the double dutch as the girls were doing double dutch. And they said, oh, Miss Wilson, you know how to do, oh, get out of here, we'll go crazy. And all you have to do it is for 2 minutes. And then you keep your stuff and keep moving. You have connected with them forever. More and more of our teachers, which and our trainers, everybody else, they need to talk about those things because there are other even more amazing things than that. But all too often, we talk about what we're not doing, what's missing. If we change the paradigm of how we even have conversation, and instead of talking from a deficit model all the time, and talk about it from an asset model, where what are we doing well? There's amazing things that we're doing well. That if we were in a position where we're sharing that all of the time, before you tell me anything negative, let's talk about the good stuff that's going on. Let that feed our spirit. Let that fill your toolbox. Right? But that's leadership, because leadership has to foster that kind of paradigm, that kind of ecosystem. And when you do that, you can change the very nature in which we are moving and seeing this work in the first place.
It's so I have to share this in to give further evidence to what you just said. This past summer, unfortunately, I had to attend a funeral for one of my previous students, one of my former students from Bronx Early College Academy, and he was a student who graduated from the first graduating class. So I think at this point in time he was in his mid-20s. So it was not only was it a funeral, it was also like a homecoming for a lot of the students who had now graduated and starting their own families. So they all came back together. And what was interesting is, of course, after the services, everyone standing outside. It felt like school. Like nobody wanted to leave. Everybody was just standing outside talking and reminiscing. And students came to me back to back, and not a single student said to me, "Mister, remember that physics class? Mister, you remember that living environment class? What you said?" But everybody had something to say about. You remember that time you told me about this? You remember that time you were doing the Dougie, and you were jacking it up, But they remember those actions, those moments. They're not necessarily instructional, but it was those moments that they held on to that let them know that I cared. And most of the time, these moments, I don't remember them. I'm like, I did that? When did I do that? But they remember those moments. So those relationships are very, very important. And I push this with my teachers all the time. That kid who's giving the hardest time, find out about them, get to know them. And you will be shocked, how willing and open they can be about who they are, and then it gives you a whole new perspective on not only on them, on all the other students in the classroom. So that is very, very powerful. And we just lost Mr. Banks here. Hopefully he'll call back in. For right now, let me go back to. Sorry about that, guys. The connections we just lost Mr. Banks, but he should be coming back in right now. Let me do this. Sorry about that. We lost you for a second there.
Yep, that's all right. I
Yeah.
understand. It's technology. Yep.
Yeah, unfortunately, but so as I was saying, like what you were saying about those relationships are very, very important. Again, none of my students mentioned, or not even once, about class or the lecture that I had or that quiz, but they always remembered those conversations, those moments that we spent together, those field trips. The times we were on the bus going to a track meet and we're talking about our families. Those are the things they remember. And humanizing yourself as an educator, as a teacher, as a member of the community, as an elder, is powerful, because all of a sudden now they buy into the communal belief that they can be successful because this person who cares about them is telling them that they could be successful. So that's something that is number one on my list, definitely.
That's right, brother. can, and you know, and the thing that people have to get is that when you get that part, you can teach them.
Yeah.
Right? Like now they are ready to work hard because they know that you care, right? If children don't think you care, then they don't care what you think, right? And so that's that we do that, and that we recognize that it's not just you know, feel good stuff. You know, you'll have the narrative out there about, listen, just make sure the kids know how to read and write and can perform academically. We don't care about all of this touchy-feely, making kids just feel good about themselves. But if children don't feel good about themselves, they're not going to perform academically. So it starts with that. It starts with connection. Once you have that, now it's like, let's go. We got a lot that we're going to teach you, and you're going to learn, and they'll be ready to soak it up. But they're not going to make that next step if they don't think that you even give a damn about who they are.
Very true. Very true. As a principal, I'm always aware that I'm always aware that I always take advantage of these spaces to talk to my colleagues as well, and this platform allows me to hopefully reach principals around the country as well, or anyone who might stumble upon this, who might pull their principal's collar to a conversation. You as a longstanding principal, a school leader, and then a system leader as well, talk to principals. You know, what is it that we should be doing? What are our blind spots right now as far as our role in 2021 with everything happening, but especially for our young men as well, because the school to prison pipeline doesn't seem to be slowing down, you know. And I know New York City has done a tremendous amount of work. Kenyatta, you know, is doing great work in his role, you know, as far as pushing us to think about what is it that we're doing around suspensions and how we're looking now at our students, especially our young men. But from your perspective, what is it that you would want us to keep aware of in our leadership practices as far as really moving our communities forward?
I think the most important position in schools is who that role of principal is critical. I mean, certainly your teachers have to be amazing and dedicated, right? I'm not trying to separate the two, but what I'm offering up the role of principal is because I've always saw principal as the keeper of the gate. Like who do you even allow in to be a teacher in that school? And if there's somebody who's not up to being a teacher there, what do you do to make sure that they don't get to stay there and do damage? Right. So that's why I look at that role of principal is critical. I loved, above everything else that I've ever done, I've loved being a principal. Best job I ever had in my life, by far. Because as the principal, see, when I was a teacher, you were in your room, you were doing your work with your kids. But as a principal, I got to go and see everybody's class. I got a lot smarter because I was able to go in everybody's room. And then I was able to connect the dots, help to partner teachers with other teachers. I think one of the biggest things that a really good principal has to have is just vision. You know, how do you see even beyond the four walls of the school? How do you connect to community? There's some principals who don't give a damn about community. They're like, that's not my job. My job is just within the four walls and making sure that I'm hitting my scores without my kids in ELA and math. Like, that's my job. And I would say that your job is so much bigger, broader, more important than that. That if you see it in a much broader fashion, that will order your steps in a much different way. Let me give you an example of something. So, because I like to keep things very practical. Because as a teacher, as a principal, I hated to go to trainings where it was just a lot of rhetorical conversation, right?
Yeah.
I would go to meetings with my superintendent, and it was killer stuff. It was all compliance stuff. it wasn't a space that you went to learn anything. The best learning happened like when we would have a break and you got a chance to talk to your colleagues about real stuff that was going on. And so I would say as a principal, seek out mentors. Seek out answers from your other colleagues. I used to visit schools all over New York City as a principal, and even outside of New York. If I even got a hint of there was somebody who was doing something really unique, really innovative, really interesting, I said, I need to meet that person. I want to go learn that. I want to go. And if I would leave, I would go visit them. I'd have them come and see what I was doing. I built like an army of just like supporters. And I said, teach me. A lot of times folks would think that I was so smart and so creative, and I was just tapping into what other people were doing. Dr. Lorraine Monroe, she had been a former deputy chancellor. She was the founder of the Frederick Douglass Academy in Harlem. Maybe the most brilliant educator that I'd ever met. She ultimately became a mentor for me because I reached out to her and I said, I need you to mentor me. I was a young principal. I went to her. I didn't wait for it to fall in my lap. So taking that kind of initiative is really important. Recognizing that there are so many lessons to learn, not having a level of insecurity. That's something that I've seen from principals. See, I'm not an insecure kind of a guy, right? Like I know what I know and I know what I don't know. And I'm always open to learning. I've seen people who are afraid to ask because they think that that kind of exposure makes people think that they are weak. And above all else, I've got to act like I'm the strong, tough, smart, know-it-all principal in the building. That's weak leadership. Really effective leadership says, I learned, we are all learners. I'm a facilitator more than anything else. How do I get the best out of everybody that's around me? How do I encourage my teachers to bring the best ideas to me? There was a business guy that I worked with years ago, and he told me that he had been a very successful businessman, and then he became a consultant in his last 20 years of his career, and he would go to other businesses and offer up advice, and they would pay him handsomely for his advice around how to make their business better. And he told me the key to it. He said, you know what the key to is that I tell these business leaders? He said, I would take time and just go and talk to the people who work for them. They would tell me everything that was wrong at the company, and they told me how to fix it. And I would write all of that up in a report. I would take my time in doing it because I didn't want the people to realize just how easy it was. He said, if you just talk to the people who work there, they will tell you everything that's wrong, and they will tell you how to fix it. But all too often, there becomes this disconnect between the leaders and the people who work for you, because you don't want to make it look like you've created this image like I'm supposed to be all knowing. So therefore, you allow this disconnect to happen between you and your people. Guess who else will tell you how to fix it? Your kids.
Yeah.
Guess who else will tell you how to fix it? Your parents. Like the community, the village. Tap into it. They know some things. So like I would start with that as advice to principals. Number two, I would tell them you have to be prepared to work really hard, really hard. I worked really hard as a principal. I put a lot of time, effort, energy in. That was not a 9-to-5 job for me, or an 8-to-4, or whatever our contractual hours were. I didn't give a damn about contractual hours. I was like the first person in my building every day. Everybody can't do that. If it wasn't me, it was the custodian or the level 3 school safety officer. Between the three of us, we were all there way before the sun was up. I did that for a reason. I wanted to just set the tone for myself. I greeted every student who walked in my building every single day. Not most days, every single day. I greeted them with a handshake or a hug, because in that moment, I was doing a check. I was doing an emotion check. What's up, Jamal? And I could see in a moment, just through the handshake, just by looking them in the eye, if something was going on. And sometimes they walk by, it's all right, Mr. Banks, I don't even want to be bothered. And you realize, something's wrong.
Yeah.
I say, Mr. Barnett, pull him to the side. Mr. Barnett, talk to Jamal. There's something going on, right? Or the kids would come over and they tell you, Mr. Banks, somebody better talk to James because something's going to go down today at lunchtime. It's going to be a throwdown. I was like, so they're giving you a heads up because they don't want it to happen. But unless you are doing those pulse checks, keeping your hand on the pulse of what's happening in your school, now all of a sudden when you don't do that, stuff is jumping off. A lot of times, where does the stuff jump off? It jumps off at lunchtime. So I would have lunch with the kids almost every day. And if it wasn't me, one of the assistant principals, somebody, because if you could keep a check on it there, guess what? Now I don't have to have all these meetings with parents and I got to notify the superintendent's office and all of the paperwork. I stayed in front of the curve. I prided myself on that. I live by something that I call management by walking around. If you were ever looking for Mr. Banks, the last place you would find him, nine times out of 10, would be in my office. And you didn't have to look far because I was everywhere. I was in the gym. I was in the classes. Every time when that bell rang and everybody was in the hall, I'm in the halls. I didn't leave it to my deans and APs. Yeah, they were there too. But everybody knew Mr. Banks is here. I'm here. You're going to see me. You don't have to go searching for me. I'm not the principal that hides in his office and tells everybody they have to make an appointment to see me. It was a completely open door policy. And because I kept my issues to a minimum, my mind and my time was free for innovation and doing new and wonderful things that we could try because I was not bogged down every day with discipline and fights. I was so far ahead of the curve of that, it wasn't even funny. That's how I led. If I had a fight or something at school, I considered that my personal failure. So I was on roller skates. If people would come and visit me, they were like, how do you maintain this pace? I would do staff meetings, Uche, in the hallway. Kids were in the classroom. I had all the rules set up in terms of how people shouldn't have been allowed in and out of the rooms. My hallway should be pretty quiet right now. So guess what? We pulled 4, 5, 6 chairs out. And now I'm having a meeting with my guidance counselors, whomever. I didn't do those meetings in my office. I did them in the hallway. Because you know what I was able to do? I was demonstrating to the rest of my faculty that I'm always going to be out and present. And number 2, meeting in the hallway gave me a chance to make sure I'm seeing that the rules and regulations that we put in place were actually manifesting themselves. You don't see that if you're hiding in your office. And if you really are running your school the way that you should be, guess what? You can actually have meetings in the hallway. Now, you may not be able to do that on day one, but that's what you're working toward. But that's what I mean when I say leadership. That's time, effort, energy. Popping in on the rooms. I wanted to be ahead of the curve, not behind the curve. Miss Williams, how we doing? We're good? We have an issue with Jamal like we did yesterday? Nope, Jamal is fine. No problems. I will let you know, Mr. Banks. And I'm looking at Jamal. Jamal, don't let me have to come in here. And the kids are cracking up. Oh, he's like, come on, Mr. Banks. Right? So you got to laugh and joke with them. You got to have fun with them. They got to know that you love them. And when you do that and you set that as your tone as the head of the school, then it's easier for that to flow with everybody else. And then when you have that teacher that's lazy, that doesn't want to work hard, they stand out like a sore thumb. And they can't exist in a place like that where everybody else is busting their tail and loving the kids and working hard and staying after school and doing the extra tutoring. Like when that's the culture that you create, it's hard for the lazy person to stand. They stand out like a sore thumb. And after a while they realize, yeah, this is not the place for me. I got to go someplace else where it's easy to just do the basic stuff and then go home. And every teacher is not going to give you 1,000%, right? But at the very least, do your job, do the best that you can with what you got, and we'll take it from there. That's how I led. That's what I believe. It drives me crazy when I see schools that are out of control. because I realize that's a failure of leadership.
Yeah.
When a school is out of control. Absolutely.
I agree with you with that 100% with that. We've come to the close of a full hour, so I just want to just really quickly put it out there. If anyone is watching, anyone has any questions, please drop it in the chat. There's been a lot of commentary in the chat. If you have any questions, right now the clubhouse room is empty. So if there's any questions in the chat, please put it on the screen so I can share that with Mr. Banks. I have one more question, and this is for our families. I'm a big believer that not only am I in service to the community as far as my students are concerned and teachers, but I tell my parents all the time, I'm in service to you as well. Like at the end of the day, this doesn't happen if you didn't have these children to bring to us, for us to actually educate. And not only that, when you bring your child to my school building, I know the expectation is that I'm going to give them the same level of love and attention that you give them at home, if not more. So, my question to you is, what words do you have? And I saw a lot of this in the book, to those parents who are struggling with their boys, who are on the verge of saying, especially right now with the pandemic, this has been an ongoing thing, more so with boys than the girls. I don't know what to do anymore. He doesn't want to do the work. My family's telling me to just wash my hands of him. Like people are going through it right now, and a lot of young men, they don't know what's up or down, left or right. So what advice would you give to parents and families, and maybe even to the young men as well, about how to navigate through these times?
Raising children is not easy. So first of all, I tell them I understand. I'm a dad. Raised 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. So I don't just tell you about what I heard. I tell you about what I know, what I've lived, what I have experienced. Raising children is hard. And the best time to be a parent is when they're young. That's the best time to pour into them in the way that you would want them to go. It's hard to try to get tough, when they're 15 and 16 years old. You got to teach those lessons very early on when they're most impressionable. But no matter what the situation is, they still want to be loved. They want to be taught. Young people are influenced by things even beyond their parents. They're influenced by these outside factors. But other children are, they're going to make you earn your money on why you became a parent in the first place. That's just what it is. But if you keep the faith, whatever your belief system is, pray for your children. And because I'm a person of faith, right? So whatever your faith is, whatever your belief system is, call on that. But in the African tradition, we talk about the village raising the child. It is not the sole responsibility of just the parent. Activate the village. There are people in the village who can help. There might be that child's favorite teacher who connected with him. Maybe his favorite teacher from the 4th grade. Reach out. Because sometimes even when that young man or young lady is acting up and they're in the 10th grade, the person who they will straighten up for is Miss Jackson, their 4th grade teacher. And all of a sudden, as big and out of control as they might want to act sometimes, they revert right back to being that 4th grader when Miss Jackson shows up. There's a level of respect that they have. So seek out Miss Jackson. Ask her to come and have a conversation or build a more long-term relationship. Just seek out the village. Activate the village. Whether it's your pastor from your church or whatever it is. Brother, big sister. That's what I say. There are people there to help. But don't give up. Don't ever give up.
Amen to that. Amen to that. I want to thank you so much for just making this time out, especially the fact that I do the show at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. So I know I know that this is for a lot of podcasts it's highly unusual, but I'm a dad of 2 young children, so I gotta wait till they go to bed. Then of course during the week I'm a principal, so life is not as free during the week. But I really appreciate that. There is one more thing, and this is the last thing. There are conversations out there. I know nothing's etched in stone, right? But those of us in New York City know that that the Brooklyn Borough president Eric Adams has announced his candidacy for mayor. And it was kind of out there in the atmosphere that he had said that his choice for chancellor, if that ever happened, would be you. How do you feel about that? And I know, listen, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It's just my curiosity. So guys, if you're listening, it's not me trying to like sell on Mr. Banks being chancellor. But I'm just curious because I think that's something that is worth me asking.
Well, I appreciate you asking. Listen, I think any of us who have demonstrated a level of excellence in our roles in our schools, particularly as administrators, somebody has said to you, you're going to be the chancellor one day. Right? I mean, if you're a good principal in your school and your folks love you and they say, one day you're going to be the chancellor. So there are a lot of us that have heard that. I would say this, I know Borough President Adams really well. He's worked with us over the years. But I know a lot of the folks who are running for mayor. I think, first of all of our folks getting out and being active and being civically engaged and voting is critical,
Yes.
number one. I'm always prepared to serve. This is what I have dedicated my life to. If I'm called upon to serve, I will be ready to do that. And if that is being chancellor or being whatever role it might take to be of service to our people, is something that is, for me, I feel like I've been blessed to be here and called to do. And so we will see how things play out in the future. I would just suggest to your audience also that that they take a look at the most recent documentary that has come out about our work. It's called The Infamous Future, and it is airing now on HBO Max. So if you have access to HBO Max, look for the film. It came out on January 1st. It's called The Infamous Future, and it is the story of the Eagle Academy and the work that we're doing. It's being seen now by people all across the country. We've heard from folks all across the nation around this work. It's a pretty inspirational film. There's a brother who is from London, John Campbell, who was working on a film about educational reform in America, and then came and saw what we were doing at Eagle and threw away his film and made his entire film about the work that we're doing. So we've been very blessed and fortunate to be in this space. Really thrilled. Encourage people to check it out. We will see what happens. The entire New York City is going to turn over this coming June. We're going to have borough presidents, new borough presidents. 75% of the city council is going to be brand new. So it's an exciting time as we get ready for the resurgence of New York City, as we've come through some very, very dark times. But the best is yet to come. And we're going to need all of us to be ready for our children, for our families, for our communities, for our city, to bring the best that we have to bring. And I'll be ready to do whatever I need to do with that as well. So thank you, Brother Uche. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. If you could just hold on a second before you hang up, then wrap up the show. I just want to chat with you for a quick second. So I'm going to go ahead and mute your mic for right now and switch over. So let me go ahead and here we go. Try again. And there. All right. So guys, I'm sorry. You guys know this tech thing is always interesting. So again, I want to thank everyone for being part of this conversation this evening. I hope that you pick something up, either as a community member, as a teacher, as a principal, as a student, as a parent. The work that we need to do here is a work that involves the whole entire community. We're talking about it takes a village. And I really believe that. And that's been something that I've been espousing since the beginning of this podcast, and even through my career as an educator. Our children don't succeed if we're not all hands in the pot on some level. You know, we all have to bring our expertise to really push them forward. So I really hope that this evening was one that was highly informational. The other thing too is this. Engage your school communities. You know, I know it's not always the easiest thing to do. I know not every school has an open door policy, but as a teacher, as a student, as a community member, as a principal, it's on us to engage each other in these conversations. Nothing changes if we're not talking to each other. If we keep waiting for Superman, if anyone who's ever seen that documentary, keep waiting for Superman, Superman is not coming. The Superman is actually Supermen and women who are in the community, who are focused on making sure that our children are getting the best possible product, an education that allows them to conquer in the real world as adults. So again, I want to thank you so much for the time that you afforded me this evening. Please remember to subscribe, pass this around, let everybody know what we're doing here. And again, I'll see you guys next Saturday, 10 o'clock for the Sneaky Principal podcast. Thank you so much.
And now he's been promoted